You made me a joke. You, a nobody secretary who doesn't have a dime to her name, Curtis Renner hissed, pinning Josephine Hartigan against a freezing concrete pillar on sublevel B3 at 11:45 on a Thursday night. Her ex-husband had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. He had tailed a delivery truck through the loading ramp to slip into the secured level, then sat motionless in his car for 5 straight hours. He knew the guard rotation by heart. He had studied the building's security schematic and knew for certain that this particular corner of concrete had no camera on it at all. He believed that if he could just corner the woman who had spent 6 years living in his shadow, she would sign what he needed again. The only thing left that could keep him alive in front of the men he owed. He had calculated almost everything correctly. The only problem was that the schematic he studied was not the only one this building had. 15 meters away, hidden in the absolute darkness of a reserved VIP bay, an armored SUV sat with its engine switched off. It was far from empty. Rafael Santoro sat in the back seat, an unlit cigar resting motionless between 2 fingers, listening to every single word through the vehicle's external microphones. The man who owned every inch of this concrete. The man whose name the entire city of Philadelphia only dared to speak in a whisper. And Curtis Renner had absolutely no idea that he had just put his hands on the one woman he was never allowed to touch. If you want to know what happened to the man who put his hands on the wrong woman that night, leave a like so we know you're here. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that their worth is never decided by the person who hurt them. And don't forget to subscribe, because the shadows of Philadelphia are keeping far more secrets than this one. His hand was still pinning her shoulder hard against the concrete, and Josephine could no longer feel the cold. She'd tried to circle around him, tried to speak in the calm voice people used with a vicious dog, tried to make it 3 steps toward her car before he yanked her back. All 3 times, she'd failed. Now her back was pressed against the pillar, and there was barely a hand's breadth left between them. "You're violating the restraining order," she said. "You know that, don't you?" Curtis laughed, and the sound echoed through the hollow belly of the basement parking garage. "The restraining order," he repeated. "What do you think that piece of paper is?" "It's a piece of paper, Josie. I can pick it up and tear it apart, but this isn't." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a stack of papers folded in half, already crumpled, the edges curled from being shoved in and pulled out so many times. He held it up in front of her the way someone might hold up a ticket. 3 pages. "You sign the last one. That's all. Then I leave. And you'll never have to see me again." Josephine didn't look at the papers. She looked straight into his eyes, and what she saw there made her stomach tighten. It wasn't anger. She'd lived with anger for 6 years. She knew its shape, knew how it came and how it went. What sat behind Curtis's eyes tonight was something that had reached the bottom and found nothing left. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose and knew it. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "What are you asking me to sign?" "You don't need to read it." "Then I'm not signing it." His grip tightened. Pain shot through her shoulder, racing down into the same wrist that had been broken 2 years earlier, the wrist whose medical record said she'd fallen on the stairs, because that day she'd sat in the emergency room and spoken those words with her own mouth. Her body remembered. The body always remembered before the mind did. "Listen," Curtis said, his voice changing, softening, almost pleading, and that voice frightened her more than his roar ever could. "I don't want this. You think I want to be standing here this close to midnight? I've got 3 weeks, Josie. 3 weeks. When those 3 weeks are up, someone's coming for me, and they won't knock politely the way I do. That's your problem." "No." He shook his head slowly. "Not after tonight." Inside Josephine's coat pocket, her phone vibrated twice in quick succession. She knew what it was without looking. Belmont still sent the automated message at exactly that time every evening, and had for 3 days straight. $1,450 overdue for this month's rehabilitation cycle for Ellis Hartigan, 21 years old. Insurance covered the basic care, but it didn't cover the intensive morning therapy program. And that program was the very thing that had taken her younger brother from being unable to hold a cup to being able to stand up on his own. Belmont was a 4-story building on the west side of the city. The lower floor reserved for young people like Ellis who were learning everything from the beginning again. The upper floors devoted to long-term care for the elderly. And Josephine knew both parts of that building so well she could have walked through them with her eyes closed. Those 2 vibrations reminded her why she couldn't die here, in a basement, at the hands of this man. "Let me see it," she said. Curtis hesitated. That was his first mistake of the night, because to open the papers, he had to let go of her shoulder with one hand. Josephine lowered her head as though she were reading, and while his eyes stayed fixed on the page, her right hand slipped into her coat pocket, her fingers searching for her car keys, feeling for the smallest button along the edge. She'd pressed it by accident 3 times in her life, and all 3 times she'd cursed the manufacturer for putting the alarm button somewhere so easy to touch. She pressed it down and held it. The horn ripped through the basement. It didn't sound like a car horn out on the street. Inside a sealed concrete space with walls on every side, the sound slammed into the walls and came roaring back, piling over itself, until it became a howl with no beginning and no end. The car's lights flashed wildly across the ceiling. Curtis jerked in shock, the papers falling to the floor, and he spun toward the car with the face of a man who had just realized his time had run out. "Turn it off." Josephine didn't. "Turn it off now." She looked at him, and for the first time in 6 years, she heard her own voice without a tremor in it. "No." About 49 feet away, in the absolute darkness of the parking space reserved for VIP guests, the door of an armored car opened. 11:47. Rafael Santoro glanced at the watch on his wrist and calculated in his head, not about the woman being pinned against the concrete pillar, but about the 13 minutes that remained. At exactly midnight every Thursday, a refrigerated delivery truck would roll down the eastern loading ramp, stop on basement level B3 for exactly 9 minutes, then leave by another exit. No building record acknowledged that truck. None of the employees working across the 22 office floors above knew that once every week, directly beneath their desks, there was a 9-minute window the rest of the city wasn't permitted to see. That was the entire reason Rafe was here tonight, and it was also everything anyone needed to know about him. There was no need to list a man's assets once you knew he could buy an entire high-rise building simply to own 9 minutes of silence beneath it. In the front passenger seat, Salvatore Ferretti didn't turn around. He'd sat in that position for 19 years and had learned that there were moments when silence was the best form of service. But tonight wasn't one of them. "2 people by pillar number 7, Sal said. "A man and a woman. He's been down here since this afternoon." Milo checked. He followed the food delivery truck in at 6 o'clock and has been sitting in his car ever since. Rafe didn't answer. He looked through the bulletproof glass, his thumb slowly rolling an unlit cigar back and forth. From this distance, beneath the pale, white fluorescent lights, the 2 figures by pillar number 7 looked almost ordinary. A man standing, a woman with her back against the concrete. If you didn't look closely, you might think they were 2 co-workers arguing about something at the office. But Rafe had spent 40 years in a world where the distance between 2 people said more than anything either of them could speak. And that distance wasn't the distance of an argument. It was the distance between a predator and prey with nowhere left to retreat. "You want me to send Milo down?" Sal asked. "This gets handled in 2 minutes. Nobody even has to step out of the car." "Not yet. The truck gets here in 12 minutes. "I know there are 12 minutes left." Sal went quiet. He understood what the words "not yet" meant in this man's mouth. They didn't mean ignore it. They meant he was waiting for something, and Salvatore Ferretti was old enough not to ask what. Rafe reached over and switched on the vehicle's exterior audio system. He didn't make a habit of listening to things that weren't his business, but this basement belonged to him, and technically, so did every sound made inside that mass of concrete. The speaker inside the cabin crackled once, then caught the voices, distorted and echoing, but clear enough. The man's voice came first, pleading, then sharp again, then dropping into the kind of softness Rafe had heard far too many times in his life not to know exactly what it was. It was the voice of a man bargaining with something he didn't own. Then came the woman's voice. Rafe leaned forward slightly, not because of what she said, but because of the way she said it. He'd faced men who wept on their knees, men who stayed defiant until the final moment, men who went completely silent because fear had stolen their voices. But the woman by pillar number 7 was standing in an empty basement, with a man a full head taller than she was holding her there, and her voice was calm. Not calm because she wasn't afraid, calm because she was calculating. Then the insult came through the speaker. The exact words Curtis Renner threw in her face about a worthless little secretary who didn't have a penny to her name. And inside the armored car, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Sal had worked with Rafael Santoro for 19 years, and he knew the sign. It wasn't a clenched fist. It wasn't heavier breathing. It was stillness. The man sitting in the back seat suddenly didn't move even a fraction of an inch, and that was always the worst thing that could happen to anyone. Then the horn tore through the basement. It slammed against the concrete barriers, echoing in waves through the hollow space, and Milo in the driver's seat already had his hand on the door latch. Sal turned fully around. "She did that herself," he said, something almost like admiration in his voice. She didn't scream. She hit the alarm. Through the speaker, the man's voice roared at her to turn it off. And through the speaker, perfectly clear beneath the screaming horn, one word came back. "No." Rafael Santoro placed the unlit cigar on the wooden tray beside his seat, carefully, the way a man set down something he intended to come back for. Milo, stay where you are. Sal, call Reyes in security. Tell him that as of this minute, he doesn't work here anymore. And the other guy? Rafe reached for the door latch. I'll go myself. The horn was still screaming, and through that scream Curtis Renner heard another sound, steady and unhurried. The sound of leather shoes striking the concrete floor behind him. He turned. The man approaching wasn't walking any faster than someone out for a casual stroll, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, the cuffs of his shirt left unfastened, and it was that very lack of urgency that made Curtis take half a step backward, without understanding why he'd moved at all. People had an instinct for recognizing men who had no need to hurry. Rafael Santoro stopped about 3 steps away from them, and he didn't look at Curtis. He looked at Josephine. Are you hurt anywhere? Josephine lifted her head. All evening, she'd prepared herself for every possible question. For the police, for security, for some stranger passing by who might ask what was going on. Or worse, ask whether the two of them were all right, as though this belonged equally to both of them. No one had ever asked her this first. My shoulder, she said. Just my shoulder. Can you stand? Yes. Rafe nodded once, then finally turned toward Curtis. And in that small shift of attention, something changed in his face without a single muscle appearing to move. Who the hell are you? Curtis asked, and his voice cracked on the last word. This is private. Get lost. Do you know who guards the entrance to this building? The question was so unrelated that Curtis simply stared at him. What? Reyes. Night shift. Changes over at 11:30. Smokes by the west emergency exit for about 7 minutes, and for the past 3 weeks he's been leaving the loading ramp door open after 6 in the evening because he's too lazy to go down and pull it shut. You've been watching him, haven't you? You planned this carefully. Curtis said nothing. Reyes was fired 10 minutes ago, Rafe said. He's in the employee parking lot crying right now. I'm telling you this so you understand that the schedule you've memorized for the past 3 weeks no longer exists as of tonight. The horn cut off. Josephine had released the button on her keyring, and the silence that crashed down afterward felt heavier than the screaming had. I have a right to be here, Curtis said, trying to recover his footing. This is a public parking garage. I haven't done anything illegal. This building belongs to me. Rafe said it in the same tone someone might use to tell the time. Every brick, every steel beam, every inch of concrete you're standing on, the pillar behind her belongs to me. The parking space where you hid your car for 5 hours belongs to me. You aren't standing in a public place, Mr. Renner. You're standing in my house, and you just put your hands on someone inside my house. The fact that this man knew his last name drained the color from Curtis's face faster than anything else that had been said. His eyes flicked toward the SUV in the darkness, then toward the emergency exit, then toward his own car parked at an angle across the lane, and in that exact moment of calculation, he realized there was no option left. You can't touch me, he said quickly. I'll call the police. I'll call them right now. Rafe tilted his head slightly, and something like a smile passed across the corner of his mouth. So brief, Josephine wasn't sure she'd actually seen it. Call them. I encourage you to. He took out his own phone and held it toward Curtis. Use mine if you want. Then we'll stand here together and see who gets here first. The Philadelphia police or my people. Curtis didn't take it. He stood perfectly still, staring at the phone being offered to him, and Josephine saw the moment everything inside him collapsed. Behind Rafe, 2 figures had appeared without her noticing when. Salvatore Ferretti moved past Curtis the way a man might step around a pillar, without shoving him, simply coming alongside, and before Curtis could react, his right arm had been folded behind his back, his body brought forward, his chest pressed down against the hood of his own car. There was no punch. There was no sound at all except fabric scraping against metal, and Curtis's ragged breathing. Sal held him there, one hand locking the arm, the other resting on his back, as casually as if he were holding a door open for someone to pass through. Phone, Rafe said. Milo Barone pulled the phone from Curtis's pocket, pressed the man's finger to the sensor to unlock it, then leaned against the side of the car and began scrolling. He worked slowly, methodically, like a technician cleaning out a hard drive. Every screenshot of old messages, every photograph taken without her knowledge, outside her apartment, outside the building, in the supermarket parking lot, her old phone number and her new one, her address, 3 recordings of phone calls, an entire folder labeled with her name. Milo deleted them one by one, then opened the trash and deleted them again, then disconnected the cloud synchronization, then removed the backup account entirely. Josephine stood there watching, and a chill ran down her spine for an entirely different reason. For the past 14 months, She'd believed she was being watched. Now she knew for certain. And she also knew that within a few minutes, every piece of evidence proving it would no longer exist anywhere in the world. "Stop deleting," Josephine said. Milo looked up at Rafe instead of at her. And that was what made her take a step forward. "I said stop deleting. That's evidence. I need to call the police. I need them down here. I need a report filed. He just violated a restraining order in front of 3 witnesses." "You're not calling the police down to this level," Rafe said. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." "You heard me." Josephine looked at him, then at the SUV sitting motionless in the darkness, then at the clock mounted on the concrete pillar, which read 11:54, and something very cold moved down her spine. "There's something on this level," she said slowly. "Isn't there? Something here the police aren't supposed to see." Rafe neither confirmed nor denied it. He simply stood there, and his silence was a clearer answer than any words could have been. "So I lose everything," Josephine said. And for the first time all night, her voice broke. "Do you understand that? I've gone to the police 4 times in the past 14 months. 4 times. Every single time they asked me what evidence I had, and every single time all I had was my word. Tonight was the first time there was real evidence, and it was sitting inside that phone. Pictures outside my apartment, recordings, an entire folder with my name on it, and you people erased all of it in 3 minutes." Milo stopped. Rafe still didn't take his eyes off her. "What do I have now?" she asked. "I have the statement of a woman saying her ex-husband cornered her against a concrete pillar in a basement with no cameras. Another statement, my word against his, all over again. And this time he can even prove his phone is completely clean." Rafe was silent for several seconds. Then he said, without trying to defend himself, "You're right. So what are you giving back to me?" "Tonight, nothing." He turned toward Sal. "Let him go. Milo, take him up to street level. Get him outside a radius of 3 blocks. Then let him walk." Curtis was pulled upright, and before they led him away, he managed to look back at her one last time. Josephine didn't look away. She memorized that look. 40 minutes later, the 2 of them sat across from each other in an all-night diner on the corner 3 blocks away, where coffee refills were free, and nobody bothered to look up at the customers. "I don't understand you," Josephine said, both hands wrapped around her coffee cup to keep them from trembling. "You have an armored car. You have people who do everything for you. So why did you get out of the car yourself?" Rafe stirred his coffee once, then set the spoon down. "Because there are some things you shouldn't send someone else to do." She waited. Nothing else came. He didn't avoid her eyes, didn't change the subject, simply stopped there, and Josephine understood that was the whole answer she was going to get tonight. "All right," she said. "What's her name?" Rafe asked. "Who?" "The person you were thinking about when your phone vibrated in your pocket down there." "I heard it." The exterior microphone picked up the vibration. Josephine laughed. A short, tired sound. "My younger brother, Ellis. He's 21. He's at Belmont, an adult rehabilitation center on the west side of the city. He was in an accident 3 years ago. Insurance covers the basic care, but it doesn't cover the morning therapy program, and that's $1,450 a month. They've been sending me reminders about it for 3 days. That program is what got him from being unable to hold a cup to being able to stand up by himself, so I pay it." "And your parents?" "My mother died when I was 16. My father, I've never met." She took a sip. "I dropped out of college when I was 21. I married Curtis at 23 because he said he'd carry the burden with me. The way he carried it was that during the first 2 years, every friend I had disappeared one by one, and I kept thinking it was because I was busy." Rafe said nothing. He simply listened, and Josephine discovered that being listened to by someone who didn't interrupt was a feeling she'd forgotten a long time ago. "This wrist," she said, lifting her right hand and turning it slightly. "It was broken 2 years ago. There's a proper hospital record for it." "What does it say?" "Fell on the stairs." She lowered her hand to the table. "That day I sat in the emergency room and said those words with my own mouth. Nobody forced me. I said them because back then I still believed that if I behaved a little better, things would get better." Rafe set his cup down. "Miss Hardigan." "Yes. You think he came tonight because of you?" She looked up. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "You're going to wish that were true." "What do you mean by that?" Josephine set her cup down harder than she'd intended. "What do you know that I don't?" "Tonight, when he handed you those papers," Rafe said, "did you manage to see anything on them?" 3 pages. He told me to sign the last one, and said I didn't need to read it." "Do you remember the heading at the top of the first page?" She closed her eyes, trying to pull the image back out of those 30 chaotic seconds in the basement. There was the word authorization, and another line underneath it in smaller print. I only glanced at it. I think it had something about system access. Rafe nodded slowly, as though she'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. How long have you worked at Larkspur Freight? 4 years. How do you know I work there? Because Larkspur Freight leases 3 floors in my building. He pushed his coffee cup aside, clearing a space on the table as if he were about to lay out a map. Whose executive secretary are you? Marlene Voss, Chief Financial Officer. Then you have access to the cargo clearance schedule through Packer Avenue. You schedule meetings, you prepare documents in advance for her signature, and to do that, you have to be able to open the system. You also have the bonded warehouse codes, because whenever Miss Voss needs to reconcile figures, you're the one who pulls the data, not her. Josephine sat very still. I didn't tell you any of that. You didn't need to. Rafe looked directly into her eyes. Miss Hardigan, I didn't care who you were until 11:45 tonight, but from the moment I opened that car door and stepped out, I had people look into both of you. Curtis Renner lost his job 11 months ago. Before that, he was an insurance broker. Since September, he's been sitting at 3 different underground gambling rooms in Fishtown, and all 3 belong to the same person. Who? Deirdre Halloran. The name meant nothing to Josephine, and Rafe saw it on her face. You don't know who she is, and that's fortunate. She lends money. Interest is calculated weekly. She never threatens anyone. She just keeps a ledger, and when the number in that ledger reaches a certain point, someone comes to collect, and after that, people don't see the debtor around that neighborhood anymore. Josephine felt the diner around her seem to recede. How much does Curtis owe? $240,000. A sound escaped her. Half laugh, half choke. That's impossible. He's unemployed. He has nothing. Nobody lends $240,000 to an unemployed man. Exactly, Rafe said. Nobody lends an unemployed man that kind of money. They only lend it when he brings them something worth more than money. Josephine became perfectly still. Her hand remained around the cup of coffee that had already gone cold, and she could feel the tips of her fingers growing colder with it. 3 weeks ago, Rafe said, Renner sat in Deirdre Halloran's office and proposed a way to settle his debt. He didn't have money, so he sold something else. He told her his former wife was the executive secretary to the chief financial officer of a maritime logistics company. He told her you could access the cargo clearance schedule and the bonded warehouse codes at Packer Avenue. And he told her you were easy to control, that he'd made you do anything he wanted for 6 years, and that he could make you do it again whenever he needed to. Josephine couldn't speak. That system access authorization in his coat tonight wasn't meant to take money from you, Rafe said. You don't have anything for him to take, and he knows it. He said it himself, that you don't have a penny to your name. What he needed was your signature on a document authorizing a second account to access the system under the permissions assigned to you. After that, every search would appear under your name. Every piece of data flowing out would carry your name. And when someone discovered it, you'd be the one sitting in an interrogation room while he'd already paid off his debt and left the city. Josephine lowered her head. For a long time, when she finally looked up, her eyes were dry, and that caught Rafe's attention more than tears would have. For 14 months, she said, I kept believing he couldn't let me go. I've moved 3 times, and every time I moved, I thought he was doing this because he couldn't bear losing me. I even felt sorry for him. There were nights when I lay awake thinking that if I'd just tried a little harder back then, maybe he wouldn't have become this. She pushed the coffee cup away from her. Turns out he never wanted to keep me at all. He was just trying to find my price, and he found it. $240,000, paid to another woman, with my own signature. Rafe didn't comfort her. He only said one thing. Now you understand why he wasn't afraid of the restraining order tonight. He has 3 weeks. When those 3 weeks are over, they come to collect. How many days are left? 4. Josephine was standing outside the bank at 8:30 on Friday morning, 20 minutes before opening, and she'd been there long enough for 2 employees arriving early to glance at her for the 3rd time. She hadn't slept all night. She'd lain staring at the ceiling, repeating one sentence Rafael Santoro had said when they parted, that if Curtis had already sold her access to someone else, then he'd probably been selling smaller pieces of her for a long time. She needed to know what she had left. The teller was a young woman with her hair pulled into a high ponytail, and the pleasant voice of someone trained to keep everything feeling easy. You'd like to check a savings account? My emergency account, last 3 digits, 782. May I see your identification, please? Josephine slid her driver's license through the opening in the glass. She watched the girl's fingers move across the keyboard, watched the glow of the monitor fall across her face, and saw the exact moment the professional smile on that face faltered for half a second. That half second told Josephine everything before the girl even spoke. Miss Hardigan, this account currently has a 0 balance. Josephine heard the words clearly, but it took several seconds for them to reach her. There was $11,000 in there. The current balance is 0. There were 3 withdrawals, made at the counter rather than at an ATM, 4 days apart. The last one was almost 6 weeks ago. A counter withdrawal requires a signature. Yes, there is an authorized signature from the account holder. I'm the account holder. The girl hesitated. Please give me a moment. The manager came out 3 minutes later, carrying 2 printed pages. Josephine looked at the copies of the withdrawal slips, and at the signature in the lower right corner. It wasn't perfect. The final upward stroke of the H rose too high, and the dot over the I sat slightly too far to the left, but it looked right. It looked so right that if Josephine hadn't been the person who had signed that name thousands of times in her life, even she would have believed it. That's not my signature, she said. The manager nodded in the way of someone who had heard those words many times in his career. In that case, you'll need to file a dispute and make a police report. Would you like me to print your complete statements for the past 6 months as well? Yes, and I want to know whether there's anything else in my name. He typed for a while longer. Then he stopped. You have an active, unsecured personal loan. I don't have any loan. $30,000, disbursed 6 weeks ago through this same branch. The file includes a copy of your driver's license, payroll records, and a signature. He turned the monitor toward her, and Josephine saw her name, her date of birth, and the address of the old apartment she'd moved out of 10 months earlier. The funds were transferred into another bank account on the same day the loan was disbursed. She left the bank at 9:20 with a thick stack of printed papers in her hands, and she didn't drive away. She sat in her car in the parking lot, windows closed, engine off, and spread the statements across the steering wheel. Her finger followed each line. 3 withdrawals, each just under $4,000, spaced exactly 4 days apart. Then the $30,000 loan. Then nothing else. She sat up straighter. Something didn't fit, and it took her 10 minutes to put a name to it. If Curtis had taken the money to pay gambling debts, then these withdrawals should have been scattered. A gambler who was losing didn't withdraw money on a schedule. He withdrew when he lost, and losses could happen at any time. But these 3 withdrawals were spaced evenly, exactly 4 days apart, like someone making installment payments on something, not someone chasing a gambling loss. And the second thing made even less sense. Rafe had said Curtis owed Deirdre Halloran $240,000. So what was this $41,000? It was too little to settle the debt, too much to be spending money, and if he truly needed cash to buy time with his creditor, he should have taken the entire $41,000 at once. Instead, he'd withdrawn it slowly, steadily, with a rhythm to it, like someone paying a recurring fee for something with a fixed schedule. Josephine looked down at the date on the final line and felt the hair rise along the back of her neck. The $30,000 loan had been disbursed 6 weeks ago. Curtis hadn't sat in Deirdre Halloran's office and offered to sell Josephine's access until 3 weeks ago, which meant that before he'd ever thought of using her to settle his debt, he'd already taken her name and used it for something else. Something that, until that Friday morning, sitting in her car with the stack of printed papers spread across the steering wheel, Josephine still couldn't begin to imagine. She called Rafael Santoro from inside the car, and he answered on the second ring. I need to know where that $30,000 went, she said. The bank says the money was transferred to another account the same day. They won't tell me whose account it was. Do you have the receiving account number? Yes, it's printed on the statement. Read it to me. 4 hours later, Josephine was sitting at the plastic table in the same diner from the night before, this time in broad daylight, and Salvatore Ferretti placed a yellow envelope in front of her. Rafe sat across from her without touching his coffee. The receiving account belongs to a small insurance brokerage in Delaware, Sal said. $30,000 went into it as an advance insurance premium. Insurance for what? Open it. Josephine pulled the papers from the envelope. The first page was a copy of an application for term life insurance. In the box for the insured person's name was Josephine Marie Hardigan, 28 years old, along with her social security number and the address of her old apartment. In the box for the face value, a number had been typed neatly, $500,000. She turned to the second page. In the box for the sole beneficiary was the name Curtis Allen Renner, with the relationship listed as spouse. The diner around her was still filled with ordinary noise, dishes clattering, someone laughing at the next table, and Josephine heard all of it as though it were rising toward her from underwater. We've been divorced for 14 months, she said. The application says the policy was taken out during the marriage, Sal replied. Nobody bothered to verify it, but there has to be a medical exam. I know that. A friend of mine bought life insurance and they made her get blood work, blood pressure checks, medical history forms. I've never set foot in any clinic for this. Rafe spoke for the first time. That's the standard underwriting channel. There's another one called Simplified Issue. No examination, no tests, just 7 yes or no questions on paper. In return, the premiums are many times higher, and the coverage amount is limited. It's meant for older people or people with existing conditions who wouldn't make it through a medical exam. It's legal. Then why is this policy worth $500,000? Because he didn't go through the front door. Rafe tapped a finger against the 3rd page. Look at the issuing agent's signature. Josephine looked. There was an unfamiliar name, and beside it, an agent identification number. Curtis Renner worked as an insurance broker for 7 years, Rafe said. He was fired 11 months ago, but the people who sat beside him in training sessions are still in the industry. He didn't need to put his own name on anything. He only needed someone he knew who was willing to push the application through the system, mark the box waiving the medical exam, and agree not to ask another question. In return, that person collected a commission on the $30,000 premium. That's why he withdrew your money 3 times, exactly 4 days apart. He was gathering enough to cover the first premium payment. Josephine set the papers down on the table. Both her hands lay still on the plastic surface, and she looked at them as though they belonged to someone else. Do you know what the funniest part is? She said, her voice perfectly calm. He sold this stuff for 7 years. For 7 years, he sat at my dinner table at night and told me stories about his clients. He used to say one thing all the time. He said life insurance was the only product the buyer would never get to see themselves use. He said it like an industry joke. I laughed. Sal lowered his eyes to the table. Rafe didn't look away from her. This isn't my signature, Josephine said, pointing to the final page. No, but it looks like my signature. Better than the withdrawal slips at the bank, Rafe said. He practiced. 6 weeks ago, he'd practiced enough. So 6 weeks ago, he was already doing this, she said slowly. And 3 weeks ago was when he went to see Miss Halloran and offered to sell my access, which means this came first. Yes, which means he didn't originally plan to use me to get data. Originally, he planned to use me another way. And only when that way was taking too long, when he realized he didn't have enough time to wait, did he switch to forcing me to sign the authorization. Rafe didn't answer. He didn't need to. And all 3 people sitting at that plastic table understood that his silence was the answer. Josephine folded the papers again, slowly and neatly, as though making the edges line up perfectly was the only thing left in the world she could still control. For 6 years, she said. I thought the worst thing he ever believed about me was that I was useless. Turns out it wasn't. The worst thing he ever believed about me was that I was worth $500,000, and all he had to do was spend $30,000 of my own money to buy that number. She raised her eyes to Rafe. What am I supposed to do now? Rafe's answer that day was 3 words. Go to work normally. And Josephine did exactly that for the rest of Friday, until 3:15 in the afternoon, when her phone vibrated with a landline number she knew by heart, Belmont. The caller was the woman at the reception desk, her voice calm in the particular way of someone trained to keep it calm. Miss Hardigan, I'm calling to let you know something, and I want to tell you right from the beginning that your brother is completely fine. Josephine stood up from her desk and walked into the hallway. What happened? At around 2 o'clock this afternoon, a man came here asking to see Ellis Hardigan. He said he was his brother-in-law. Did he get inside? No. Nobody gets past this desk unless their name is on the visitor list. I looked him up, and he wasn't there. I told him the list is established by the registered guardian, and I don't have the authority to add anyone. And he started speaking a little louder. I pressed the button for support staff. Before he could get out here, the man had already left. Altogether, he was in this lobby for less than 4 minutes. Did Ellis see him? No, ma'am. He's been in the rear training area all afternoon. He finished therapy at 3 o'clock. And right now he's in the common room with the others in his group. He doesn't know anything happened, and I don't think there's any reason he needs to know. Josephine rested her forehead against the cool hallway wall. Thank you. We have cameras in the lobby. I've already saved the footage from 155 to 210 and set it aside. If you need a copy, all you have to do is ask. That was the sentence that made Josephine straighten up. In 14 months of making reports, not once had anyone volunteered those words to her. Please keep it for me, she said. Don't delete it. No matter who calls and asks, don't delete it. She called the police from that very hallway, and this time she didn't tell her story from the beginning the way she had the previous 4 times. This time she read out the restraining order case number, the date it had been issued, Curtis Allen Renner's name and date of birth, then said there was a care facility with security cameras that had already preserved the footage, and a witness prepared to testify that the man had identified himself by name at the front desk. The dispatcher was silent for several seconds, then asked her to repeat the case number. By 7 o'clock that evening, an officer called her back. They'd found Curtis at the month-to-month apartment he rented across the river. He hadn't resisted. Josephine sat in her car in the Larkspur Freight parking lot, still holding the phone after the call ended, and allowed herself to feel relieved for exactly a minute and a half. On Saturday morning, that feeling ended. Rafe called her at 9 o'clock. He's out. What? First restraining order violation. No weapon. No physical contact. No prior record. The judge granted bail. He walked out of custody at 7:20 this morning. Josephine sat down on the edge of the bed. So nothing has changed. One thing has, Rafe said. His release conditions include electronic monitoring. He's wearing an ankle bracelet. He can't remove it, and it alerts the monitoring unit every time he enters the exclusion zone around your home, your workplace, or Belmont, so he can't come near me anymore. It means if he comes near you, someone will know. Those are two different things, Miss Hartigan, and I want you to understand the difference clearly. That bracelet doesn't stop him. It only records where he's gone. Josephine looked out the window. Outside was a completely ordinary Saturday morning. Someone walking a dog, someone carrying boxes out to a car. So now he's free to move around the city with a bracelet on his ankle. And the 3 weeks he had are down to 3 days. 2, Rafe said. Today's Saturday. She closed her eyes. Mr. Santoro, I'm asking you seriously. If he can't pay the debt on Monday, what happens to him? Rafe was silent just long enough for her to understand that he was deciding whether to tell her the truth. That matters less than another question, he said at last. What you should be asking is what a man with only 2 days left, no options remaining, and the knowledge that every step he takes is being watched, will do next. The answer came at noon on Monday, and it didn't come from Curtis. Josephine left the building at 12:15 to buy coffee from the place she usually went to 1 block away. And when she returned to her usual seat by the window, someone was already sitting there. A woman, around 50, wearing a gray wool coat, her hair cut short and neat, with a cup of tea rather than coffee in front of her. She was reading the little tabletop menu with genuine concentration, as though she were seriously considering ordering dessert. Miss Hartigan, she said without looking up. Sit down. I'm only asking for 10 minutes, and I won't keep you any longer than that. Josephine didn't sit. Who are you? You already know who I am. Deirdre Halloran lowered the menu. If you didn't, you wouldn't be standing so still. Sit down. There are 20 people in here and a camera on the ceiling. That's exactly why I chose this place, so you can feel safe. Josephine sat, her back straight, her hands resting on the table. I want to say from the beginning that I had nothing to do with what happened in the basement on Thursday, Deirdre said. I don't send men to pin women against concrete pillars. It's both crude and inefficient. And if I'd known beforehand that he intended to do that, I would have stopped him. Desperate men have a habit of inventing the stupidest solutions. But you knew he intended to use me to pay his debt. I knew he was offering something for sale, and I listened to what he had to say. She stirred her tea once. Miss Hartigan, I have a very simple business. I lend money, and I collect it. Your former husband currently owes me $240,000, and the deadline is today. He doesn't have the money. He doesn't have anything else of value either, because the only thing he ever had left to offer was you. And now the whole city knows whose shadow you're standing under. Then why are you here? To speak to you directly. I prefer dealing with people who can make their own decisions. Deirdre pushed her tea aside and looked straight at her. This is what I'm offering. You give me this quarter's clearance schedule at Packer Avenue, and the bonded warehouse codes. Data only. No signature from you. No document with your name on it. You read it. You memorize it. You write it down by hand if that's what you prefer. In return, Curtis Renner's debt closes this afternoon. He no longer has any value to me. I'll leave him to deal with his own life, and you'll never hear me mention his name again. That's all? No. Deirdre folded her hands together. There's another part. I understand your younger brother is in a morning rehabilitation program at Belmont, and insurance doesn't cover that portion. $1,450 a month. I'll take care of it. Paid directly to the center, never through you, for as long as he needs it. No paperwork, no contract, no interest. Josephine sat perfectly still. How do you know about my brother? The cheapest way in the world, Deirdre said. He told me. The night he came to ask for a second extension, he sat across from me and laid out everything he knew about you, the way a vendor lays merchandise across a stall. He told me what you were afraid of, who you loved, where you'd break if someone pushed in exactly the right place. He told me your brother's name, the name of the center, even the exact amount, $1,450. He told me all of it to buy himself another 10 days. A long silence followed. Outside the window, People continued moving up and down the sidewalk during their lunch break. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," Deirdre said. "I'm telling you because you'll keep asking yourself until somebody finally says it out loud, and I'd rather you know exactly who he misjudged than sit there guessing." Josephine looked down at the coffee she'd never touched. "Do you know what your offer sounds like?" "Of course I do. It sounds exactly like him. He handed me a piece of paper too, and told me all I had to do was sign one thing, and everything would be fine." "It's different." Deirdre stood, fastening the button of her coat again. "He pinned you against a wall close to midnight where nobody could see. I'm sitting with you in broad daylight in a crowded place, and I'm allowing you to say no." She placed a white business card on the table, with nothing on it but a single phone number. "I'm not rushing you. Think about it. But Miss Hartigan, you should know that what I'm asking to buy isn't something only I want. Someone else wants it too, and that person doesn't necessarily have to ask you before taking it." Josephine told him about the entire meeting over the phone, and when she repeated Deirdre Halloran's final sentence, Rafael Santoro said nothing for 7 full seconds. "Repeat those exact words to me." She said that what she was asking to buy was something someone else wanted too, and that person didn't necessarily have to ask me before taking it. "Thank you. Go to work as usual, and don't call the number on that business card." He ended the call and sat for a long time in his office on the 22nd floor, looking down at the city without truly seeing any of it. A woman like Deirdre Halloran didn't waste words. She had just told him that she was competing with someone else to buy the clearance schedule at Packer Avenue, and there was only one person on Rafe's side who knew the full details of the route that moved through Packer Avenue every week. "Sal," he said when the door opened, "who else has the reconciliation copy of this quarter's vessel schedule besides you and me?" Sal stopped in the middle of the room. Warren. Warren Tate had been the Santoro family's accountant for 22 years. He'd started back when Rafe's father was still alive. He'd sat in the little room on the ground floor keeping the books when Rafe was 12 years old, and still had to stand on a chair to reach the filing shelf. In 22 years, not a single number had ever been wrong. "Check his accounts," Rafe said. The results came back 3 hours later, and they looked bad. 6 weeks earlier, more than $40,000 in cash had been deposited into Warren Tate's account in several separate transactions at 3 different branches. 4 weeks earlier, he'd opened a file with a real estate brokerage in Florida. 2 weeks earlier, he'd taken 3 days off claiming he had a medical appointment, and nobody had verified it. And on his work calendar, on the exact day Curtis Renner had sat in Deirdre Halloran's office, there was a 4-hour gap with no notation at all. Rafe read the entire report, folded it, and set it on the desk. "Take him to the warehouse on Delaware Avenue tonight," he said. "You know what to do." Sal didn't move. Was something I just said unclear? No. Sal remained where he was, his arms resting at his sides, and looked directly at the man he'd followed for 19 years. "Are you sure? Because there isn't a way back from this." The only sound in the room was the air conditioning. Rafe sat motionless, and in that moment he heard his own voice repeating the order he'd just given. Heard it as though from outside himself, and it sounded like somebody else, the kind of man his father used to speak about with contempt, the kind who gave orders while angry. "You think I'm wrong," he said. "I think $40,000 is a little cheap for a man selling out an entire family," Sal replied. "And I think if he were really preparing to run to Florida, he wouldn't have come to work this morning, wouldn't have brought a box of pastries for the people downstairs, and wouldn't have asked me about next month's meeting schedule." Rafe closed his eyes for 1 second. "Hold it. Call Warren up here." Alone. Warren Tate walked in at 7 o'clock that evening, 58 years old, lean and spare, carrying his document case just as he'd done every evening for 22 years. He sat in the chair across from Rafe and listened while Rafe read every line of the report aloud, without interrupting once. When Rafe finished, Warren placed his case on the desk and opened it. $41,200, Warren said. "You want to know where it came from? Here." He pushed a stack of papers across the desk. "I sold my mother's house in Camden in January. The buyer paid part of it in cash because they're in the used car business. The notarized contract is on the second page. I deposited it in several installments because each branch has a reporting threshold, and I didn't want my name appearing on any federal transaction report. You know why? And Florida. My wife has stage 2 cancer." Warren said it in the even voice of a man who had practiced saying the words many times. 4 weeks ago, we put down a deposit on a small place near Tampa because her doctor said the humid climate might be easier on her after radiation. The 3 days I took off last month were the 3 days I spent sitting outside a hospital room. And the 4 hours missing from my work calendar," he said, turning to the last page, were 4 hours I spent in the waiting room of the oncology department at Jefferson Hospital. Here's the appointment record. It has the stamp, the check-in time, and the check-out time. Rafe picked up the paper. He read it very slowly, then set it down, and the room stayed silent long enough for Sal to turn his face toward the window. 22 years, Warren said without raising his voice. And I've never taken a single dollar from this family, but I understand why you asked. If I were sitting in your chair, I'd ask too. Rafe stood and walked around the desk. He held out his hand, and Warren Tate shook it. I'm sorry. You should only apologize if you actually did something, Warren said, not because you almost did. When the door closed behind him, Rafe stood staring at it for a long time. So it isn't coming from my side, he said. Nobody inside this family leaked anything. Then where is it coming from? Rafe turned back toward the desk and reached for the phone. Sal, 3 weeks ago, who signed the order moving her parking space down to level B3. Call building management. I want the original file. Right now. On Tuesday morning, Josephine arrived at the office at 8 o'clock, and her badge wouldn't open the glass door on the 14th floor. She swiped it a second time, then a third, before a coworker passing by opened the door with his own badge and said it was probably another system glitch, that several people had been having the same problem that morning. She sat down at her desk and turned on her computer. The login screen rejected her password. At 9:15, the head of human resources and a man from compliance whom Josephine had never met asked her to join them in the small conference room at the end of the hallway. A stack of printed papers was already waiting on the table. Miss Hardigan, we need you to explain several queries that were made under your account, the compliance officer said. He turned the papers toward her. On the 11th of this month, at 2:14 in the morning, your account accessed the complete clearance schedule for this quarter's Packer Avenue route. Then, at 2:21, it accessed the bonded warehouse code table. Both were bulk downloads, rather than ordinary viewing within the system. Josephine stared at the time. 2:14 in the morning. Yes, I was asleep at home. I wasn't in this building at 2 in the morning. The queries weren't made from inside the building. They were made through the remote access portal using your exact username and password. Then someone used my account. That's what we have to determine, the man said, his voice still polite. Have you shared your password with anyone? No. Have you ever written your password down? No. Do you know anyone who could know your password? Josephine opened her mouth, then stopped. She thought about Curtis. She thought about all those nights years ago when he'd sat at the dinner table in their home, and she knew one thing with absolute certainty that she couldn't say in this room, that the man wasn't capable of doing this. He didn't know where Larkspur Freight's remote access portal was. He didn't know her password because she'd changed it 4 times since the divorce, most recently 6 weeks ago in accordance with the company's mandatory cycle. He didn't even know what the phrase bulk download meant. Whoever knew how to enter the system at 2:14 in the morning and download an entire quarter's worth of data in 7 minutes was someone familiar with that system. I don't know, she said. Miss Hardigan, I want to be very clear so there is no misunderstanding. We haven't reached any conclusions. But under company policy, effective immediately, you're being placed on paid suspension until the internal review is complete. All of your access privileges were revoked as of 6 o'clock this morning. We need you to surrender your employee badge. Josephine unclipped the badge from her collar and placed it on the table. The plastic card made a dry little sound against the surface. She left the conference room and walked down the hallway toward the elevators, and she kept her back very straight because she knew at least 4 people were watching her through the glass walls. She was almost at the elevator when she heard the sound of heels hurrying after her. Josephine. Marlene Voss stopped in front of her, breathing slightly hard, still holding her reading glasses in one hand. I just heard. They didn't ask for my opinion. They told me after they'd already made the decision. It's all right. No, it isn't. Marlene lifted a hand and placed it on Josephine's shoulder, the same shoulder that had been pinned against the concrete pillar Thursday night. And Josephine had to fight not to flinch away. You've sat outside my office for 4 years. You're the only person in this entire company who can remember how I take my coffee. I don't believe a single word in that report. Josephine felt her eyes grow hot, and she hated herself for it. Listen carefully to me, Marlene said, lowering her voice. Someone is putting something you didn't do on your shoulders, and I know where it started. That man still hasn't let go of you, has he? I heard about what happened last week. What happened? The parking garage. Rumors travel fast in this building. She gave Josephine's shoulder a gentle squeeze. Go home and rest for a few days. Don't call anyone. Don't email anyone. Don't try to explain yourself to compliance. The more you explain, the more they'll write down. Let me handle it. I'll speak privately to the people upstairs, and tell them exactly how you've worked for the past 4 years. You trust me, don't you? Josephine nodded. Yes. Good girl. Marlene released her shoulder and smiled, the tired smile of someone who had just taken one more burden onto her back. If anything happens, call me. Any hour. The elevator doors opened. Josephine stepped inside, turned around, and in the 2 seconds before the doors closed, she saw Marlene Voss still standing there in the middle of the hallway, both hands wrapped around her reading glasses, watching her leave. During the entire ride down 14 floors, Josephine thought about only one thing. Not that she'd just lost her job, but the question she hadn't dared ask in the conference room, that if Curtis wasn't capable of doing it, then who had been sitting in front of a screen at 2:14 in the morning and typing her exact username into it? Building management sent the records up to the 22nd floor at 4 o'clock that afternoon. And they sent the originals rather than extracts, because the person asking was the owner, and nobody in that department was foolish enough to ask why. Rafe spread the 3 sheets of paper across his desk. Here, Sal said, pointing to the second page. Parking reassignment request, dated the 27th of last month. 3 weeks ago, exactly like you thought. Rafe read from top to bottom. Circumstances of request. Employee at risk to personal safety. Reason. Employee's car window was smashed in the outdoor parking area. Employee frequently works after 2200 hours. Request transfer from ground level section C to basement level B3. On the final line, under requested by, there was a typed name with a handwritten signature beside it. Marlene Voss, Chief Financial Officer, Larkspur Freight. She's her direct supervisor, Sal said. This is normal. A boss worries about a female employee working late and asks for an underground parking space. I see dozens of requests like this every year. Exactly. Rafe didn't take his eyes off the page. It's normal. That's precisely what I don't like about it. He turned the paper around. Look at this line. Requested transfer to basement level B3. Not B1, not B2. The level is specified. So, in the 4 years she's worked here, has Marlene Voss ever parked underground? Sal pulled the 3rd page closer and ran his finger down the list. No. She's had a permanent space in ground level section A, beside the main entrance, since the day the lease was signed. Then how does someone who's never been down there know basement level B3 exists, know how it's different from B1 and B2, and know exactly which level number to put on the request? Sal went silent. There's more, Rafe said. Basement level B3 isn't listed among the parking spaces available for lease. It's a restricted area of the building. In principle, management should have rejected this request immediately. He flipped back to the 1st page, the internal processing sheet, and there, in the messy handwriting of the employee who'd received the request, was a note. Called to confirm. Approved as requested. She called, Rafe said. She didn't just submit the request. She called to persuade them. Sal sat down on the edge of the desk. What are you going to tell Miss Hartigan? Exactly what is written on these 3 pages. Not one word more. Josephine listened to all of it from the chair across from him, her hands resting on her knees, and when Rafe finished, she shook her head. No, Miss Hartigan, listen to me first. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. 4 years ago, I interviewed at Larkspur with a resume that showed I never finished college and a 2-year gap with no employment. There were 4 other candidates better qualified than I was. Miss Voss chose me. 2 years ago, when Ellis needed his 2nd surgery, I needed $4,000 before payday, and I was too afraid to ask anyone. She was the one who called me into her office and signed an advance on my salary herself, without making me explain a single thing. She never asked why my eyes were swollen, never asked why my wrist was wrapped. But for those 3 months, she let me leave early twice a week. I'm not saying any of that was false. You are saying it was false. Rafe pushed the 3 sheets of paper toward her. I'm telling you that someone signed a request putting you on the exact level where, 3 weeks later, you were cornered against a concrete pillar, and that person has never set foot on that level. I'm not reaching a conclusion. I'm only putting it on the table. Josephine picked up the request and studied the signature for a long time. Do you know what this form says that you're not seeing? She finally asked. Tell me. The reason on the request says my car window was smashed in the outdoor lot. That really happened, but I never reported it to the company. I told exactly one person while we were standing by the printer, and that person was her. She listened, then went quiet and didn't say anything, and I thought she hadn't paid much attention. She lowered the paper to the desk. 3 days later, I received a new parking badge. I thought she'd remembered. You want me to reconsider that and believe she'd been planning? Rafe didn't answer. Do you have any other evidence? She asked. Not yet. Then this is only a piece of paper. She stood. Mr. Santoro, in the past week I found out that the man I once married put my name on a $500,000 contract. If I'm supposed to believe now that the only woman who ever stood up for me at work is someone like that too, then I need more than a signature on a parking request. That night, sitting on the living room floor with the stack of bank documents beside her, Josephine picked up her phone. She stared at the name on the screen for a long time. Then she pressed call. Marlene Voss answered after the first ring, her voice warm and not surprised at all. Josephine, I've been waiting for you to call. The call lasted 19 minutes, and when Josephine hung up, she felt so relieved she wanted to cry. Marlene had asked whether she was eating properly, had told her not to go out alone at night, had said she'd sent a letter to the executive board that afternoon asking them to review the entire suspension, and before ending the call she'd left Josephine with one final warning, that if anyone said anything about her, Josephine should listen to all of it before deciding what to believe, because there were plenty of people in that company who didn't like her very much. On Wednesday morning, Rafael Santoro asked Josephine to come up to the 22nd floor. Only he and Sal were in the room, and an open laptop was waiting on the desk. "Sit down," Rafe said. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand what I'm giving you. Those 3 sheets of paper yesterday, any lawyer could argue around them in court. But what's on this computer doesn't exist in any building record, isn't part of Larkspur's security system, and before today only 3 people in the world knew it existed." Josephine looked at him. "Basement level B3 has cameras," Rafe said. "Not the building's cameras. The security office downstairs can't see a single image from that level. They believe the area has no surveillance coverage, and I've allowed them to believe that for 3 years. My system runs on a separate line and records to a private server. 6 cameras. 2 of them point directly at areas every official diagram identifies as blind spots." Josephine understood immediately. So Thursday night was recorded in full, from beginning to end. She sat still for several seconds. "You've had that for an entire week and you didn't tell me." "If I gave it to the police," Rafe said, "the first question they would ask wouldn't be what that man did to you. The first question would be why a basement level officially listed as having no surveillance has 6 cameras running on a private line, and who paid for them. I didn't tell you because I didn't know yet whether I was willing to pay that price. And now I'm not showing you Thursday night." He turned the screen toward her. "I'm showing you an afternoon from 3 weeks ago." The image appeared in black and white from a high angle, and in the middle of the frame was the familiar row of concrete pillars. In the lower right corner, the timestamp showed the 26th of the previous month, 1:42 in the afternoon, daylight hours. The basement was almost empty. A figure entered the frame from the direction of the elevators. The woman walked slowly, not like someone searching for her car. She stopped at the beginning of the row, looked around once, then began moving along the pillars. At the 4th pillar, she tilted her head back and looked up at the ceiling, where one of the building's camera housings was mounted, then kept walking. At the 5th pillar, she looked up again. At the 6th, she looked up, gave the faintest shake of her head, and continued. At the 7th pillar, she stopped completely. She craned her neck and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she stepped back 3 paces, looked left, looked right, and walked one full circle around the pillar. After that, she took out her phone and took 4 photographs, one of the pillar, one of the ceiling above it, 2 of the lane leading toward the loading ramp. Then she typed something into the phone for about half a minute, put it away, and walked straight back toward the elevators, without going near a single car. From the moment she entered the frame until the moment she left, 4 minutes and 10 seconds passed. Rafe froze the image. "Pillar number 7, he said. "That's the only pillar on this level the building's surveillance system doesn't cover." She checked all 6 before it to find it. Josephine couldn't speak. She stared at the frozen frame, at that familiar figure, the gray wool coat, the slight tilt of her head when she was thinking, the way she held her reading glasses in her left hand without putting them on. 3 weeks ago, Rafe said. The afternoon of the 26th. The request to move your parking space was submitted to building management the following morning, the 27th. Sal placed the 3 sheets of paper from yesterday beside the laptop. "The request by itself doesn't prove anything," Rafe continued. "Neither does this footage by itself. She could always say she came down to inspect the parking area before requesting a space for an employee, and that would sound perfectly reasonable. But watch the order of what she does. She didn't come down to see whether the parking space was good. She came down to find the place with no camera coverage. Then the next morning, she filed a request putting you in that exact spot." Josephine raised a hand over her mouth. She thought about the hand Marlene had placed on her shoulder in the hallway on Tuesday. She thought about the 19-minute phone call the night before, and that final warning, that if anyone said anything about her, Josephine should listen to everything before deciding what to believe. She knew, Josephine whispered. She knew you'd find the request. That's why she told me that last night. It's possible, but she doesn't know about these cameras. Nobody does. Rafe closed the laptop. And that's why tonight we're still exactly one step ahead of her, Miss Hartigan. Only one step. That one step ahead was used to trace everything back through 4 years. And the man who did it wasn't Rafe, but Warren Tate. He spent 2 full days in the small room on the ground floor with 2 stacks of records. One containing the customs declarations Larkspur Freight had submitted, the other containing the actual weight reconciliation reports the Santoro family had kept, because their shipments moved through the same port. On Thursday afternoon, he knocked on the door of the office on the 22nd floor. Do you want the number first or the story first? The number. 4 years. 117 shipments. Total discrepancy. Approximately $2,600,000. Warren set the papers down. The method is very simple and very dirty. Every shipment was declared at less than its actual weight. The undeclared portion still passed through the port, but on paper, it didn't exist. Someone was selling that empty space to third parties who needed to move cargo through without leaving a trace. A small amount from every shipment. Add 4 years together, and you get that number. Who approved those declarations? The chief financial officer, Marlene Voss. Rafe pulled out a chair and sat down. Tell me the rest. The rest is what kept me awake. Warren turned to another page. For the past 4 years, the person preparing every file before she signed it was the executive secretary, the person pulling the data out of the system, printing it, assembling it, placing it on her desk. Do you understand what that means? It means that in every system log, every query, every time an original file was opened, the name that appeared was Josephine Hartigan. For 4 years, not once, not 10 times, thousands of times. Rafe sat perfectly still. She didn't hire her to help her. She hired someone with an unfinished college education on her resume, a 2-year employment gap, no family behind her, a sick younger brother to support, and a marriage that was already falling apart. Warren said it in the dry voice of an accountant. The other 4 candidates were better, but all 4 of them had somewhere to stand if they fell. Miss Hartigan didn't. She wasn't choosing an employee. She was choosing someone who wouldn't survive an investigation. Sal had been leaning against the wall from the beginning, and only then did he speak. So the query at 2:14 in the morning, that was the part that took me the longest. Warren pulled out another printed page. Miss Hartigan's account doesn't have bulk download privileges. Those are only granted at director level and above. But a system administrator can temporarily elevate an account's privileges and then lower them again, and that elevation only appears in the administrative log, not in the user log. Who has administrator privileges? 3 people. The head of technology, the chief executive officer, and the chief financial officer. Warren tapped the page with one finger. At 2:09 in the morning on the 11th, Marlene Voss's administrator account elevated Josephine Hartigan's account privileges. At 2:23, it lowered them again. Both actions came from the same address as the queries made in between. Nobody in the room said anything for a long time. Then 4 days later, Warren continued, that same person sent an internal alert to compliance reporting unusual queries under Miss Hartigan's account. Rafe stood and walked toward the window. She created the trail herself, then reported the trail herself, because she needed the investigation to begin where she chose, Warren said. If someone discovered the discrepancies in 4 years of customs records, the investigation would naturally lead to the name appearing in every system log, but that would have been slow and uncertain. She wanted that name already suspended, already associated with suspicious activity, before anyone had time to start asking questions. And Renner, Sal said. What about Renner? Rafe turned back. Renner is the final piece, and I misunderstood him from the beginning. He looked at Warren. Can you tell her? You tell her. I thought Renner found Halloran on his own and came up with the idea of using his former wife to pay his debt, Rafe said. But a man like him doesn't know what routes Larkspur Freight runs through Packer Avenue, doesn't know what bonded warehouse codes are, and certainly doesn't know how much access his former wife has. Someone told him. Someone found him while he was drowning in gambling debt and told him he was sitting on a gold mine without realizing it. Sal let out a long breath. And if everything fell apart, Warren finished, there was already a perfect explanation waiting. A desperate former husband, under a restraining order, with a history of stalking his former wife, forced her to get the data for him. Nobody would have looked any further. The story was too neat. Josephine had listened to all of it from the chair in the corner of the room. She'd been sitting there from the beginning without anyone paying much attention to her, both hands resting in her lap, and when Warren finished, she didn't cry. She said only one sentence, very softly, almost to herself. For years, I was afraid of one man. All three of them turned to look at her. 6 years. Every time he stood outside my door, every time my phone rang at 2 in the morning, I called one person so I wouldn't have to sit there alone. I called her. She lifted her eyes. Turns out the person I called every time I was afraid was the person who pushed me over the edge. The letter was in her mailbox on Friday morning. A white envelope with the Belmont logo printed in the upper left corner, and Josephine knew what it was before she opened it. Dear Miss Hartigan, as the registered guardian of Mr. Ellis Hartigan, the center is writing to inform you that the fee for the intensive morning rehabilitation program is now overdue for a second billing cycle. Under our policy, if this balance isn't paid within 30 days of the date on this letter, we will be required to transfer Mr. Ellis to the basic care plan covered by insurance. We sincerely regret having to send this notice and ask that you contact us if you need to discuss additional payment options. She read it a second time, then a third, and every time she stopped at the words basic care plan because she knew exactly what those words meant. They meant Ellis would still be fed, still be bathed, still have his blood pressure checked twice a day. They meant her younger brother would be kept from getting worse. But on Tuesday morning the week before, when she'd gone to visit, Ellis had taken 11 consecutive steps between the parallel bars, and he'd turned to find his sister's face among the people watching, grinning from ear to ear, sweat soaking through his shirt. Those 11 steps hadn't come from basic care. They'd come from $1,450 a month, and from a trainer willing to sit down on the floor with him 4 mornings a week. Josephine carried the letter out to the car. She got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and didn't start the engine. She took out her phone and opened her banking app, because somewhere inside her, there was still that foolish reflex of a person hoping the number might somehow be different this time. Savings account, 0. Checking account, $217. Her paid suspension did mean she was still receiving her salary, but the next payment wouldn't arrive until the 15th of the following month, and she'd done the math in her head 3 times, over 3 sleepless nights, and knew that once the rent was paid, almost nothing would remain. She closed the app and opened her contacts. She scrolled slowly, reading each name. There were the names of 2 friends from college she hadn't spoken to in 5 years because during the first 2 years of her marriage, they'd disappeared from her life one by one, and back then she'd convinced herself it was because she was busy. There was her landlord's name. There was the name of a woman in Larkspur's Human Resources Department, whom she wasn't allowed to contact now. There was Ellis's doctor. She kept scrolling and stopped at the letter M. Marlene Voss. That number was still there, directly beneath her fingertip. And for 4 years it had been the number she'd called whenever something happened, and she didn't know what to do. She stared at the name for a long time. Then she pressed and held it and deleted it. Her finger moved upward again, and there was another name. Deirdre Halloran. Josephine hadn't saved it, but she'd looked at the number on that white business card enough times to know it by heart. She sat in the car with that number in her head and told herself it wasn't the same as signing a document. It was only reading and remembering, only copying something onto a sheet of paper in her own handwriting. No signature, no document carrying her name. The woman had made that very clear. 30 days, $1,450 a month. For as long as Ellis needed it. 11 steps between the parallel bars, and his head turning to search for his sister's face in the crowd. She placed the phone on the steering wheel and pulled her hand away from it as if she'd touched something hot. And then, sitting alone in her car in the rear parking lot of her apartment building at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, Josephine Hartigan broke down. She cried without making a sound, both hands gripping the steering wheel, her forehead resting against the backs of her hands, her shoulders shaking in waves. She hadn't cried in the basement Thursday night. She hadn't cried at the bank. Hadn't cried when she saw her name on the $500,000 policy. Hadn't cried when she unclipped her employee badge and placed it on the conference table. Hadn't cried when she watched the woman in the black and white footage walk past 6 concrete pillars to find the 7th. For 2 weeks, she'd stayed standing through all of it. What finally brought her down was a past due notice written in a polite voice, with even a courteous closing at the end. She cried for about 4 minutes. Then she sat upright, wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt, looked at herself in the rearview mirror, and saw both eyes swollen and red. And she remembered the 3 months when Marlene Voss had never once asked why her eyes were swollen. Josephine understood then that Marlene hadn't avoided asking out of tact. She hadn't asked because she didn't need to know. She only needed Josephine to stay exactly that way. Josephine started the engine. She didn't drive home. She drove to Belmont, parked in the front lot, and sat there for another 10 minutes, until the redness in her face faded, before going inside and spending the entire morning with her younger brother without saying a single word about the letter. Rafael Santoro arrived at Belmont at 2 o'clock that afternoon. He didn't go inside. He waited in the front parking lot, leaning against the black SUV, and when Josephine came through the main doors, he said only that he had something he needed to discuss and hoped she would give him 15 minutes. They sat on a stone bench at the edge of the parking lot, far from any windows. "I know about the letter from the center," Rafe said. "Do you have someone watching my mailbox?" "I asked their accounting department. This place receives funding from a foundation I contribute to." "I asked, and they answered." Josephine said nothing. "I came to give you an option," he said. "Hear all of it before you answer." "Go ahead." "First, your brother's morning program fees. This afternoon, I'll have someone pay the full 24 months. It isn't a loan. There are no papers you have to sign, and nobody will ever come back later to remind you about it. The center will record it as a grant, and you won't have to answer anyone's questions." She sat still. "Second, Renner's $240,000 debt to Deirdre Halloran. I'll buy the entire debt. Starting tomorrow afternoon, she won't be his creditor anymore. That means she no longer has any reason to come near you, and the offer she made you at the coffee shop on Monday will disappear on its own. And third," Rafe looked straight out across the parking lot. "Third, Curtis Renner will never appear in your life again." Josephine turned toward him. "Be more specific. You already understand. I want to hear you say it." "All right." He didn't look away. "It means you wake up Monday morning and you don't have to think about him anymore. No trial. No lawyers. No 2 years spent in court. No sitting across from him in a courtroom and recounting every single thing to a panel of strangers. He disappears from this city, and nobody looks for him. Because when a man who owes $240,000 and is being tracked with an electronic ankle monitor disappears, people consider that something they should have expected. And Marlene Voss? Her situation is more complicated. But if Renner is gone, then the only testimony directly implicating her is gone too, and she'll understand that. I'll deal with her another way." A long silence followed. In the distance, one of the center's small buses pulled in, and the people inside began getting out. "Mr. Santoro," Josephine said, "do you know what Ellis asked me today?" "No. He asked why I've been coming in the mornings lately. Before this, I could only visit on weekends. I told him I was on vacation." She lowered her eyes to her hands. "I lied to my brother. I've been lying to him for 2 weeks, and every time I do it, I feel a little more like someone else." Rafe didn't interrupt. "Your solution, when I heard it, I really did feel lighter inside. I'll admit that to you. For about 3 seconds, I felt as though the whole weight had come off me." She looked up. "Then I thought about 10 years from now. Ellis will be older, and one day he'll ask me how everything that happened to me back then ended, and I'll have to answer him. How do you think I'll answer? You'll tell him it ended. I'll have to lie to him one more time. Except that time, the lie will last forever." Josephine stood from the stone bench. "For 6 years, I lived in a house where every decision was made for me by someone else. He decided who I could see, how much I could spend, where I could work, and he always said it was because he was taking care of me. There were times when I truly believed him." She looked down at Rafe. "You're not like him, I know that. But if I sit here and nod yes to you this afternoon, then the biggest thing that ever happened in my life will once again be handled by a man for me, while I stand beside him and say thank you." Rafe stood as well. "You understand what you're refusing, don't you?" "I understand very clearly. Your way will take 2 years. There will be lawyers, there will be courtrooms, there will be people digging through your entire private life in front of strangers. And you could lose. Maybe. Then why? Because if I win your way," Josephine said, "then that victory belongs to you." She picked up her handbag. "As for the first 2 things you mentioned, Ellis's expenses, I'll accept that, and I'll pay you back every dollar when I'm working again. Renner's debt, buy it if you want. That's between you and her. And the third thing? You leave the third thing alone," she said. "I need him alive so he has to sit there and listen when they read my name aloud in court." On Saturday morning, Josephine carried a cardboard box up to the 22nd floor, the kind used to hold printer paper, and set it on Rafael Santoro's desk. "What's this?" 14 months, she said. She lifted the lid. Inside were separate bundles of documents, each one marked with a handwritten label. "I started doing this 3 days after the court issued the restraining order. I'd just made my second police report, and they told me that if I had nothing except my own statement, they couldn't open a case." She took out the first bundle. Screenshots. 411 messages from 9 different phone numbers, arranged by date. "I didn't delete a single one, including the ones I never wanted to read again." The second bundle. Recordings. 19 phone calls. "In this state, recording is legal as long as one party consents. I checked with a free attorney at the support center." The third bundle. A log. Dates, times, locations, where he stood, how long he stayed, what I did. 3 moves, every one of them dated. The medical record for my wrist, the restraining order petition, and the reports from all 4 times I went to the police, each one with its case number. Rafe stared at the box for a long time. You kept all of this for 14 months. Yes. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I knew it was useless. Josephine closed the lid. You think I didn't try? 4 times I carried this box into a police station. 4 times they told me the same thing, that I kept excellent records, but it was still my word. He denied sending the messages. In the recordings, he never said anything serious enough to constitute a crime. Photographs of him standing on a public street only showed that he had a right to stand on a public street. For 14 months, this box proved only one thing, that I was afraid, and being afraid wasn't his crime. Then why bring it today? Because this week it isn't just my statement anymore. She placed 3 sheets of paper on top of the box. First, the bank withdrawal slips with forged signatures. That isn't something I feel. That's handwriting on paper, and it can be examined by an expert. Second, a $500,000 life insurance policy in my name, with false marital status information. A forged signature, pushed through by an agent willing to bypass the underwriting process. That's insurance fraud. Third, a $30,000 unsecured loan taken out in my name, with the money transferred directly into the account used to pay the premium on that same policy. She looked up. Those 3 things went through federally regulated banks, through the mail, through an insurance company operating in multiple states. This isn't a dispute between former spouses anymore. It's bank fraud and insurance fraud, and it falls under federal jurisdiction. And Voss? She's part 4. Josephine placed the final sheet on the table. The system administration logs Mr. Tate pulled, the parking reassignment request with her signature, and the footage from the afternoon of the 26th. Rafe was silent for a long time. That footage, he said. If we give it to a federal prosecutor, the first question they'll ask me is who installed 6 cameras on a basement level officially listed as having no surveillance. I know, and you still want to submit it. I want you to decide for yourself. She looked at him. I'm not asking. I'm leaving it on the table. Rafe pulled the paper toward him. He looked at it for about 10 seconds. Sal will submit a copy with a certified timestamp, he said. The source will be identified as a private surveillance system installed by the building owner in a restricted area. The truth, nothing added and nothing taken away. If they ask anything else, I'll answer. Josephine nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. That afternoon, Rafe met Deirdre Halloran in the back room of a bakery in Fishtown, and Salvatore Ferretti was the only other person at the table. I'm buying Renner's debt, Rafe said. All of it. Cash. Today. Deirdre stirred her tea. Mr. Santoro, I don't need your money. I need what I intended to buy with that debt. I know. Then you're asking me to sell cheap. No. Rafe placed a folded sheet of paper on the table. Warehouse Route 4 on Delaware Avenue. Access rights. 2 years. Scheduled entry. Door codes. You move your cargo through there. My people don't ask questions and don't make records. Sal turned his head toward him very quickly, then looked back down at the table. Deirdre opened the paper and read it. She read longer than necessary. Do you understand what you just put on this table? Yes. 4 years from now, people will say the Santoro family lost Route 4 because of a secretary. Let them talk. Deirdre folded the paper and slipped it into her coat pocket. Done. Renner is no longer mine as of this moment, and neither is Miss Hardigan. When they reached the car, Sal stopped beside the door. You know what Route 4 is worth. I do. Does she know? No, Rafe said, opening the car door. And you're not going to tell her. The call took place Monday night, and Josephine had rehearsed every word in her head for 2 days beforehand. Miss Voss, I'm sorry for calling so late. It's all right. How are you doing? I'm giving up. She let her voice sound tired, and she didn't have to pretend very much. I'm withdrawing everything. I'm dropping the dispute with the bank. I'm not appealing anything with compliance anymore. I called the lawyer too, and I'm not pursuing the case against Curtis. I can't afford it. The other end of the line went silent for exactly 1 beat. Have you thought this through? I have. I'm leaving Larkspur for good at the beginning of next month. I have an aunt in Harrisburg. I'm taking Ellis up there. There's another center there that's much cheaper. I just have a few things left to clear out of the building. What things? I still have that box of personal records in the trunk of my car. It's been there for 2 weeks, and my car is still parked in the basement. My access badge has been deactivated, so I'll have to ask security to let me down. I'm going Wednesday night to get everything and give up the parking space. What time? Probably around 11:30. That late, there won't be many people around. I don't want to run into anyone from the company. Be careful, Marlene said, her voice as warm as it always was. It's very dark down there. Josephine ended the call and sat staring at the screen until it went completely black. On Wednesday night at 11:20, she called the pretrial monitoring unit and gave them Curtis Allen Renner's case number. She stated her name clearly, stated that she was the protected person named in the restraining order, stated that she was currently present at an address inside the exclusion zone imposed on the subject, and asked them to document the call. The operator repeated the case number and confirmed that the report had been logged at 11:23. Then Josephine stepped into the elevator. Basement level B3 looked exactly as it had that night. The same pale white light, the same low hum from the ventilation system. Her car was still in the same space. Pillar number 7 stood exactly where it had before, gray and cold. Josephine walked over and stood beside it, placed her handbag on the hood of the car, slipped a hand into her coat pocket, and pressed the record button on her phone. She didn't look up at the ceiling. She knew where the 6 eyes were. At 11:41, the western emergency exit door opened. Curtis Renner walked toward her, and this time he wasn't hiding in the darkness. He came straight ahead with both hands in his pockets, carrying himself like a man who had run out of places to hide. "I knew you'd finally come to your senses," he said, stepping closer. "She told me you were ready to drop everything. That right?" Josephine didn't move. "Who is she?" Curtis froze for half a second, and in that half second he understood he'd said too much, but he was too tired to take it back. "Voss. You know damn well who." "Miss Voss called you?" "She's been calling me since October. She found me first, Josie. I didn't find her. She sat in her car outside the place I'm staying and told me my ex-wife was holding the keys to a whole gold mine while I was sitting there starving to death. She told me exactly what to ask Halloran for. She told me I needed your signature on the authorization form. You think I would have come up with that scheme on my own?" Josephine didn't let a single muscle move in her face. "And the $30,000. "What?" "The $30,000 loan taken out in my name, and the $11,000 in my savings account. You withdrew it 3 times, 4 days apart." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "So you found that too. What did you buy with it? If you already know, why are you asking?" "I want to hear you say it." "Life insurance," Curtis said, his voice rising. $500,000. I had Perry push it through the no-exam channel. He took the commission, and I signed your name on the last page. There. Happy now? That's what you wanted to hear, isn't it?" His voice struck the 4 concrete walls and came back at them. "You did that 6 weeks ago," Josephine said. "Then 3 weeks later you went to Halloran, which means selling my access wasn't your first plan. You had something else in mind before that." Curtis didn't answer. He took 1 step toward her. On that exact step, a hand landed on his shoulder from behind and held him in place. Salvatore Ferretti didn't say a word. He simply held him there, and Curtis couldn't move another inch. At the same moment, 4 blocks away, a screen inside the electronic monitoring unit's control room flashed red, reporting that the device assigned to Curtis Allen Renner had just entered the exclusion zone listed in his conditions of release. Josephine pulled the phone from her coat pocket and held it up so he could see the recording still running on the screen. "You were talking pretty loud," she said. "This whole level heard you." Then she lifted her head, for the first time that night, and looked directly at the ceiling above pillar number 7. "And there are 3 more up there." The police arrived 4 minutes later, and nobody needed to explain very much, because 2 separate alerts had already been logged in their system before the patrol car even started moving. Curtis Allen Renner was taken away at 11:53, and this time he didn't say a word, and didn't look back at anyone. When the sound of the last siren finally disappeared up the ramp leading to street level, Josephine sat down on the concrete step at the foot of the emergency stairwell, both hands resting on her knees, and she stayed there for quite a while because her legs refused to stand. Rafael Santoro walked over. He didn't stand in front of her, didn't bend down, didn't offer her his hand. He sat on the concrete step beside her, on the same step, and quietly looked out across the empty stretch of basement. "You still haven't answered me," Josephine said. "Answered what?" "That Thursday night at the diner. I asked why you got out of the car yourself. You said because some things shouldn't be left for someone else to do." "That wasn't an answer." Rafe nodded slowly. "No, it wasn't. Can you tell me now?" He was silent for a moment. "My mother spent the last 2 years of her life on the 3rd floor of Belmont," he finally said. "The long-term care wing. She had a stroke when she was 71, and after that she couldn't speak anymore. For 2 years, I visited her every Sunday morning." Josephine turned to look at him. There were 14 rooms on that floor, and not everyone had someone coming to visit. Rafe continued. "There was an old woman in the room at the end of the hallway, who went 3 years without a single visitor. There was an old man who'd once been a welder at a shipyard, and his children lived in California. Every Sunday morning, there was a woman who came in, sat in the common room, and read the newspaper aloud to them. She wasn't family. She wasn't staff. She just sat there reading the weather, the sports pages, little pieces of local news, reading as though the whole room was listening. You saw me. I saw you once, from the far end of the hallway, about 65 feet away. I didn't come closer. I didn't ask your name. I didn't ask the staff who you were. I left it alone because I thought some good things should simply be allowed to happen without someone like me stepping into them. He turned toward her. I didn't know your name until 11:45 on Thursday night 2 weeks ago, when Sal read your license plate to me. Josephine lifted a hand to cover her mouth. When did your mother die? 3 years ago. September. Then I was still reading the newspaper there back then, she said softly. Ellis had only been at Belmont a few months. Every Sunday morning, I came 2 hours early because his therapy started at 10 o'clock, and if I sat around doing nothing, my mind wandered too much. Do you remember the old woman in the last room? Miss Kowalski. Yes. Rafe smiled faintly, a very brief smile. My mother was in the room next to hers. They both sat in silence. Somewhere above them, the ventilation system continued its steady hum. I want to tell you one thing, Rafe said. I didn't save you tonight. Sal stopped him for one step, and that was a step he wouldn't have been able to take much farther anyway. You called the monitoring unit before you came down here. You built that trap. You stood in front of him and asked every question until he told the truth himself. I only stayed close enough so you wouldn't have to be alone while you saved yourself. Josephine lowered her head, and this time her eyes were dry. For 6 years, one man told me every day that I was worth nothing. Then another person quietly calculated how much I was worth and wrote a number down on paper. I believed both of them. Listen to me once, and then I'll never say it again, Rafe said. A person's value isn't measured by what the people who hurt them decide they're worth. It's measured in those Sunday mornings when nobody paid you, nobody praised you, nobody even knew you were there. You've been living that way for years without ever knowing what it meant. I knew. Josephine didn't say anything. She only reached out her hand, and Rafe took it. And the two of them sat there together on the concrete step until she was able to stand. 7 months later, Curtis Allen Renner received a federal prison sentence for bank fraud, insurance fraud, and signature forgery, along with an additional sentence for violating the restraining order. Marlene Voss was indicted for 4 years of fraudulent customs declarations, and investigators were still counting. Josephine Hartigan never returned to Larkspur Freight. She submitted her own applications, went to her own interviews, and accepted an operations coordinator position at a company on the north side of the city, a place that had nothing to do with Rafael Santoro, exactly the way she wanted it. Ellis remained at Belmont, still attending morning therapy 4 times a week, and that summer he walked 37 consecutive steps. Every Friday evening, the black car waited at the curb outside her office, with the rear door already open, and Rafe never stepped out to take her by the hand. He only waited. One evening, she stopped on the sidewalk, looked at him, and said, "This time, I'll walk on my own." Josephine's story reminds us that someone who truly loves us doesn't drag us forward, but stands close enough for us to find the courage to take the step ourselves. That the kindness we give when nobody is watching is still seen by someone, and sometimes those very acts come back years later to save us. And that the bravest thing in this world isn't enduring one more day, but opening your mouth and speaking the truth. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share it so that every day we can continue listening together to more meaningful stories. How did Josephine's story make you feel? And what part of it stayed with you the most? Please leave a few lines in the comments below. We truly hope to hear what is in your hearts. We wish everyone watching this video abundant health, a joyful life, and peace each and every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.